Good afternoon, everyone. I am Sheldon Owen. I'm the Extension Wildlife Specialist here with WVU Extension. Housed here in Morgantown, getting to travel the state, talking all things kind of wildlife related. I'll often comment the first call I get in the morning is, Sheldon, how do I improve habitat to increase the number of deer on my property? Which is a great conversation to have. As soon as I hang up with that individual, the neighboring landowner will call, Sheldon, how do I get rid of all these deer on my neighbor's property because of the conflicts that some of these wildlife species can actually create out there? Today, we're just going to, introduce some of the common wildlife that you may see in your garden and some of the common techniques that we use to try to reduce damage caused by wildlife. Hopefully you've been able to get out and you're starting the process. You've got things planted. Maybe you have things that they're sprouting, growing up now. And once we start planting these plants, depending on what we have around our property, we are creating an attractant. If there is nothing in the understory, nothing in the forest that surround our property, or if we're surrounded by turf grass in some of our neighborhoods in more urban areas, when we plant these diverse plant species, we are creating an attractant. And so we are going to draw wildlife species into the yard. Sometimes that's good. And we want to have those wildlife species coming in. So whether we have fruits and vegetables or flowers that are growing out there, we can attract different wildlife species. And again, we do this in some cases, whether we're growing produce for us at home, or those flowering plants to increase the pollinators that are out there. They're also helping us grow some of the plants that we want to promote in our gardens. Some of this is good. We want to come out there and we want to see these monarch butterflies, excellent pollinator, a phenomenal species in this regard of it takes multiple generations to complete its migratory pathway from central Mexico up here to the northeastern or northern United States. So it's just kind of fascinating. And now, because of decline in habitat, decline in the overwintering areas in central Mexico, this species is experiencing a significant decline. 80–90% of its population has dropped over the past 20 years. So if you're planting these flowering plants in your garden, I would encourage you to promote milkweed, because that's the plant species, or the Asclepias species, about 9 different milkweeds that we can find here in West Virginia. That's what they need for their host plants, for them to lay eggs on, for the larvae to feed on, to grow and develop, and for them to metamorphose into these adults. And so we want to attract some wildlife species. Sometimes we get some strange things that are coming into our backyards, like this common snapping turtle. So we can create habitat or areas that will create or invite species that we're not exactly sure if we want them or not. But these can also be very beneficial. But it's great to see the variety of wildlife that's out there, and the variety of wildlife that we can actually attract to our backyards and into our gardens. Most commonly, we can attract species that we don't necessarily want to see in our garden. And this is not to disparage the white-tailed deer. It's one of my favorite species that is out there across the landscape, but they definitely can eat what we're trying to grow and cause some significant damage and headache and heartache when we're trying to grow a garden, trying to produce crops, or even just trying to improve habitat in our backyards. They are considered a keystone species, and overpopulation of white-tailed deer can overbrowse an area and can negatively impact that habitat for not only themselves, but for other wildlife species as well. It can shift plant communities to what would be a more native plant community to an exotic invasive plant community, things that they don't prefer to eat. And so they can have a significant impact on the landscape. And so it's definitely in our best interest, if we start to manage the habitat that is surrounding our homes. One, to give deer something else to eat other than what's grown in our garden. And two, so we can provide habitat for other species that may be negatively impacted by overbrowsing by white-tailed deer. Now, if you're a gardener, you probably have attended some of our Master Gardener programs, or at least heard the term IPM, or integrated pest management, just using multiple tools, multiple techniques and methods to try to reduce damage at the lowest cost to the landowner and the least kind of damage to wildlife and to the gardens that you're trying to protect. And so again, we try to get very creative, right? We have integrated pest management. When we're talking about wildlife damage management, we're just talking about an integrated wildlife damage management approach, using these multiple tools and techniques and methods to try to reduce damage to protect what we're trying to grow. There's not this one step you can do this and it's going to take care of all your problems. There are every situation is different. Techniques work in different ways. What will work in your neighborhood may not work in another. And so it's difficult to try to pinpoint, this is the answer that everyone can apply and everyone can fix or help reduce their wildlife damage, the damage that's occurring from wildlife in their backyards. But as we go through this today, I also need to kind of think about these 4 different categories. One is, can we do something to the habitat? When we first look at habitat, can we change that to discourage wildlife from using our backyards? Do we need to put up some type of exclusion? Do we need to put up a fence, some type of barrier to keep animals out to protect what we're trying to grow? Can we apply a repellent, whether it be a scent-based or a taste-based repellent, or is it noise, a light-based repellent to scare animals away, to keep them out of an area so they don't cause damage to the particular crops that we're trying to grow? In some cases, we actually have to reduce the population. We have to use lethal control to reduce the number of animals that are out there and reduce that damage that's occurring. Now, if you're planting a garden, obviously you're planting plants that are very attractive to wildlife species. They're preferred by a lot of our wildlife species. And so when we're talking habitat management, in regards to wildlife damage management, it's kind of giving them something else to eat somewhere else. And so look at the surrounding area, look at your woodlot, look at the property that's around you. Can we promote food in those areas, food for the wildlife species, to reduce the amount of time they spend feeding on our garden? If our garden, if our landscaping is the only food that is available, what do you think these animals are going to eat? And so we try to give them something else to eat somewhere else. To reduce, and it's not going to eliminate all the damage that's caused in your garden, especially if we're talking about white-tailed deer. They are selective browsers. They're going to come through and say, yep, I think I'll have some of your tomato plant today. I'll nibble on this corn over here. Maybe some of the broccoli that you have growing out there, and then I'll go on and eat some clovers that are growing on the side of your property, the acorns that have just fallen in the fall of the year. And so it will help reduce that damage. It's not going to eliminate it, but giving them something else to eat somewhere else can definitely benefit you. And that's, kind of what we're talking about habitat management. In some cases, we won't talk much about lethal control today, but in some cases, we just need to harvest more. If you are in an area where you can hunt, we may need to harvest more deer during the hunting season to reduce the damage or reduce the number of deer that are on the landscape, thereby reducing damage that they can cause. Now, we can look at some of these other commercially available and even homemade remedies in terms of trying to reduce deer damage or scare deer away. When we talk about repellents, we can talk about lights, noises, sights, and sounds, but a common repellent that many of our landowners will use are these scent or taste-based repellents. If you're talking about a scent-based repellent, it's one that emits an odor, such as blood meal or rotten eggs, rotten milk, that as it starts to decay, it stinks and emits this odor, and that odor is a deterrent to deer coming into an area. And that's kind of the best case scenario, because as they approach your yard, they smell this putrid smell and like, nope, I don't want to go in there and feed. There are other repellents that are taste-based repellents. And so it is most commonly, it's capsaicin, which is a hot sauce, is a primary ingredient. So they have to actually ingest or taste the vegetation where you've sprayed this repellent for them to actually get that negative stimulus. And so you'll still see some damage because they actually have to eat the leaf that you sprayed this chemical repellent upon before they get that negative stimulus. So again, if you're looking at any of these commercially available products, read the label, see what's in what's their main ingredient, whether it be, again, blood meal, rotten milk, putrid eggs. Those are your scent-based repellents, and then a capsaicin, hot sauce will be more of a taste-based repellent. See what works for you. And it comes down to cost. These repellents have what we'll call questionable effectiveness. I can't put the guaranteed stamp of approval. This is going to work in your backyard every time on any of these. We have some success. Some landowners will use these and hey, never had another issue with deer. The neighbor used the same product and deer just were attracted to their yard for some reason. So it's very difficult to say this is going to work in every situation, but it may be worth a try. You think about the economic impact. If you're just losing $5, $10 worth of plants or shrubbery, whatever it may be, is it worth paying $20, $30, $50 for a gallon of this chemical repellent? It may be. If you can't grow anything in your garden, buying $50 worth of this repellent could be beneficial. And there are some homegrown or homemade remedies, like many people will swear by a bar of Irish Spring soap. You hang this up in your garden, and as it weathers, it will emit this odor, and deer just repelled by this Irish Spring scent. But in other cases, people say, hey, my deer all smell Irish Spring fresh because they're bathing in the soap. Again, so questionable effectiveness. Once you apply this, if it rains like today, if I apply it today and it has a heavy rainstorm tonight, it may wash it away. So you may have to reapply it for it to be effective. So, consider those when you start looking at some of these commercially available products. Here's one in the lower right-hand corner, milorganite, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I don't know the correct pronunciation. It's made out of Milwaukee. It's made from human refuse. And so it's a fertilizer that you can apply and sprinkle around your landscaping. It does emit an odor. It doesn't smell like human refuse, but it does emit an odor, and it can keep deer out. Some pretty good studies in terms of applying this to clover patches, which are a highly preferred deer food, and keeping deer out for several days, 30, 45 days in some cases. $20 for a bag of this fertilizer may work. You're only down $20 if it doesn't. So, and it can provide some fertilization. And you can look on the bag, and it's made from organic nitrogen. It is not organic certified. So if you're an organic producer out there, this would not meet the qualifications of that. Sometimes it takes a fence or some type of barrier to keep these wildlife species out, whether it be a plastic kind of a netting that you can apply around, or the individual tree tubes that you can see behind. Some type of barrier to keep deer away. It can be very effective. The gold standard is an 8-foot woven wire fence. Not practical in most of our backyards or around some of our gardens, but a 7.5, 8-foot plastic fence, this little deer kits, the deer fence kits that you can get at Lowe's and Home Depot and your home and garden stores, a couple of $100 can protect a tenth or a quarter acre, and can be effective. You take it down after the growing season, put it back up the next year, and so it's an effective tool to utilize over multiple years. Even a low-cost electric fence, peanut butter fence is what we'll call it. A deer has hollow hair and hollow hooves, and so it can kind of walk through an electric fence and never get shocked in some cases. But if it sticks its tongue or nose to that fence, it can receive that negative stimulus, that shock, and it can deter that animal from coming into an area. To ensure that deer sticks its nose or tongue to that fence, we'll apply these aluminum foil flagging, or pieces of aluminum foil smeared with peanut butter to attract the nose, to attract the tongue. That electric charge is transferred through that aluminum foil. And it can deter deer, and very effective. Just a couple of dollars with inflation, that may be $3 to $4 now per linear foot, but definitely, relatively low cost, and protect, an opportunity for you to protect your gardens with minimal investment. And even just, single strand can work, but these multiple strands, this is a great example. This was a high deer area. The only food available to those deer was that clover patch in front of them. And so, definitely a lot of pressure that were hitting those clover patches, but electric fence was very effective at keeping deer out. And you can look at this photo and you can see, there's green on the outside. So there's browse available for deer. This is all Japanese stilt grass or some cool season grasses, which are not preferred by deer. Rarely do they eat those unless there's nothing else to eat. And then Japanese barberry, multiflora rose. And so these are those exotic invasive species that deer are not browsing on. And in many forests around our state, that's what we're going to see, those exotic invasive species that deer just no longer eat, or not preferred by white-tailed deer. Now, deer get blamed for a lot of damage. And definitely, if you're in an area where you can hunt, I encourage you to hunt. Either you can utilize the meat, or you can donate it to needy families around the state. Removing or lowering the number of deer that are out there on the landscape can benefit us all. Not only us as we're trying to grow something, but the habitat that we're trying to protect and promote for other wildlife species as well. Now, deer get blamed for a lot of the damage that's caused out there, but there are other little critters that can be attracted to your yard and will feed on what you're trying to grow. Rarely are we looking at a rabbit. In most cases, what a cute little bunny. Once it starts, eating on our crops or our flowers in the flower bed, it turns into a dang rabbit pretty quick. And so in some cases, rabbits can even cause damage in our gardens and in our flower beds and ornamentals that are planting around our house. So if you look at the damage, in many cases, deer do not have upper incisors. And I'll show you a picture of it here in just a minute. I believe I have one later in the presentation. They don't have upper incisors. And so when they bite vegetation, they kind of tear it. And so there'll be a little tendril of vegetation left on the damage that is caused. Rabbits and voles that we'll talk about in a moment both have upper and lower incisors. And so when they cut vegetation, it's like a pair of scissors. And so they'll cut it nice and clean. And so you can kind of determine what's feeding or what's causing that damage based on the actual damage itself. And if it has been torn, broken, or if it's been snipped off cleanly by those individuals with upper and lower incisors. So in most cases with our rabbits, creating that cover, a 20-inch hardware cloth or metal flashing type of fence will keep rabbits out. They're not very good at climbing, but that's a little bit of labor that goes into building that. You'll see deer away, you'll see rabbit away as these repellents in some of your local home and garden stores. Those can be very effective in some cases, not all, not 100% effective. But removing that kind of that protecting our deer, our rabbits like low-growing herbaceous vegetation next to cover. So they want that briar patch close by so they can escape cover. We've got a little Cooper's hawk living in our neighborhood that's doing a wonder on not only our voles, but our rabbit populations here in the neighborhood. So they're exposed because we don't have a lot of cover for them. So when those rabbits go out to feed, these hawks are coming through, and it's sort of a natural predator that's out there that can reduce our rabbit populations. But even putting up some of that repellent, a rabbit away or deer away, that's kind of got the same scent-based formulas, can be effective, or building this type of fence. Rabbits now is going to be a more and more common occurrence as we go into spring, but you'll see these kind of areas of dead grass or kind of grass mixed with hair. Our rabbits will start laying nests, and it's just a little shallow depression filled with belly fur and grass that's around. So it looks like a little dead spot in your yard. But if you run over it with a lawnmower, you kind of break that vegetation away, and you'll see that there's a rabbit nest with maybe 6 to 9 little bunnies in that nest. Common, we'll get calls every year about these nests, so just be careful, be aware. If you don't mind them being in your yard, then mow your grass a little bit taller, 3 to 4 inches, so you can actually dry over these or mow over these without knocking down into the nest itself. Another common culprit that we'll see is a vole and also a mole. We have two different mole species groups here that we'll talk about. Voles are those that are herbivores. They're running or creating these kind of raceways through the thatch or through the grass layer. It's common to see it at the end of winter when the snow retreats. We see these little raceways running through the thatch or even into our mulch. And those are created by voles. They're herbivores, and this is probably the most common one, small little rodent that are feeding on the vegetation that we're trying to grow. So they'll come in and chew and gnaw at the base of our plants, or even crawl up into tomato plants and clip limbs to drop the tomatoes down that they can feed on. And this is an example. This is that photo. This is where a deer has been feeding, and you can kind of see that little tendril of vegetation. If it were a vole, it would be a nice clean cut. And so many of our deer get blamed for this level of damage that's above the 20 inches, where you would think, okay, a rabbit can't eat that high up. It must be a deer. But some of our voles can actually climb up into our plants and feed on those plants. And so voles can get away with a lot of damage they're then blamed on our deer. But our voles, again, they're cyclical in population. You may see a few this year. Next year, there's hundreds. And so their populations can really grow rapidly and quickly, and they can cause some damage to your landscaping, like this chew into the base of our fruit trees. There are some repellents and toxicants that are available for voles here in West Virginia. These are not species specific, target specific. And so if you put these toxicants out there on the landscape, anything that eats it can become sick and potentially die. And so if you're going to use this specifically for voles, put it in areas where only voles can get to it. And if you can find those carcasses, get rid of them, because you don't want this secondary toxicity. You don't want a dead vole carcass out there that has this poison, this toxicant in it, where a raptor or a cat or something else can get that and actually get sick from that. Snap traps, especially in small areas, work extremely well. You can put these snap traps in the raceways, put a little peanut butter on the pan itself, and as they'll come through, you can knock down a vole population relatively quickly with just, there's a 4-pack of traps can be $3, $4. So you can have a significant impact on a vole population relatively quickly. If you have other songbirds in the area that you may have to run the risk of capturing as well, you want to cover those traps, and so those other animals can't get into those traps. So you're targeting only the voles that are out there. Now we also have that other species, which is a mole, which is an insectivore, and it's the one that's completely fossorial. It's underground. It's feeding on insects, and it's the one that creates those raised earthen tunnels. As it burrows through the ground, it's pushing that soil up above it. And so it's the one that's creating those raised earthen tunnels in our landscaping. And in many cases, moles are just the ones causing the damage to the turf that is out there. And so if you're, a lawn specialist, or at a golf course, moles are the ones that are causing the greatest issue. 3 different species of moles in the state. There are some toxicants. 90% of their diet is going to be earthworms. So if you have a healthy soil in your lawn, you may be attracting moles. But it's only going to be a few. You're probably only having maybe 3 or 4, maybe 5 in your backyard at any given time. So it's a very low number of animals actually causing damage. So the harpoon style traps or the scissor style traps you can pick up at your local home and garden store can quickly remove those moles if they're causing damage to your landscaping. And again, if you can live with it, why not let them be out there? They're going to be eating some of the earthworms and aerating the soil, so they can be an actual benefit. But if the damage is too much for you, then there's some simple removal techniques to actually remove these moles. A lot of the toxins that you see for mole is also a granular based, and they're eating earthworms. And so it's just not something they're normally feeding on. And so now they've created these earthworm shaped toxins that you can drop down into the tunnels that are more likely to be picked up by a mole. But moles prefer live, wiggly worms. And so just a plastic looking worm at the base of the tunnel is not a highly desirable food source for our moles, but it can potentially work. So trapping is probably your best case in this scenario. What we will see this next year with this emergence of cicadas, a lot of insects are going to be, these little grubs and insects will be emerging from the ground. And so we'll probably see an uptick in skunk damage because they're going to be coming in. Skunks are insectivores. They're coming in looking for these grubs as they're emerging, as they're coming out of the ground. And so, a lot for these skunks to feed on. And so we'll have an uptick in the skunk population next year because they'll be healthier going into next year. So we have a lot more reproduction. But just look for the digging in your yards, kind of these funnel-shaped holes that are going to be dug down into your yard looking for these grubs. Those are most commonly caused by our striped skunk and also our spotted skunk. In some areas, we can see some of that type of damage. So be on the lookout for this. Turkeys are going to be eating cicadas. Skunks will be eating cicadas. Deer may even eat cicadas if they're everywhere. If they're talking, we get the emergence that they're predicting this year. So it can be a pretty interesting year, pretty fascinating. But we'll probably see an uptick in skunk damage this year. And the damage itself is not that big of a deal, but the smell that is left behind, or if you startle one in your yard, that is a bigger deal. So just be aware as you're taking your dog out at night or you're walking around at night that you may run into one of these critters across the landscape. And obviously this end over here, that is the dangerous end. Try to stay away from that, but don't try to pick one up either. They can leave quite a nasty bite. So that's, kind of the common wildlife species that can cause damage in our yards, and we may see this year. We'll open it up to questions, and Keely, I know this is just kind of the Throwdown Thursday, and so this is quick, rapid. We're throwing some information out there for you over the lunch hour. But we have that, the code word. If you're looking for that code word today, we'll stick with skunk since it was the last one. Easy to say, easy to spell, and there's your QR code. Let me look in the chat and see if there's any questions that have been asked, and then we can we'll open up to more questions if you have any today. So someone they're talking about the 4-legged freeloaders. I'm assuming that's deer, or it could apply for voles, skunks, moles, anything other than our birds that are out there, and snakes. It may also be attracted to your garden. Hopefully, there. It's kind of been negative today. We're talking about some of the damage that's caused by wildlife, but this is a great time of year to be out there. The birds are starting to return to the state, so we have a lot of new songs that are being emitted, a lot of birds that are calling out there, a lot of frogs that are calling out there. So it's a great time to get out and explore and enjoy the landscape of West Virginia and listen to the night sounds and the day sounds that are being emitted out there by our fascinating wildlife. So I encourage you to get out there and enjoy that. One question just popped up. Got any advice for squirrels? If the squirrels are causing damage to your house, you may have to cover that up with some metal flashing. They're trying to get in for the cavity aspect. They're looking for a new home, so they may be digging. They can expand some small cracks that you may have in your older wooden home. So you have to do a little carpentry practice and trying to get up there and put some flashing or something that's a little bit harder for them to get through to cover up that hole for them so they cannot gain access. If they have already accessed your attic and you have a skunk nest that's going to be created there, you don't want to seal off the young squirrels inside and keep the female from actually getting access to them. It's like a dead mouse in your wall. It will not smell well if that's the case. So make sure that you don't have a nest with young squirrels in it inside before you seal that hole. If they're getting into the garden, make sure a low to the ground electric fence can keep squirrels from hopping into the garden or running into the garden. But there's a lot of maintenance to keeping vegetation away from that electric fence. And if you have any overhanging branches, they can just run out on the branch and get into your garden that way. Most of the damage that we see from squirrels is actual structural damage to houses. And so if you can close off any of those access holes or cracks and things that they might potentially could expand, that's your best bet at reducing some of that damage. Next one would be raccoons, and raccoons are, our masked bandits out there running across the landscape. Likewise, they may be trying to get into your house. In most of the cases, especially with raccoons or in some of our wildlife, it is food related. So they're coming in for food. So making sure if you have pets that are you keep outside, if you can bring that food inside or keep it secure so no animal has access to it except for you, so you can then give it to your pet. Reducing the access to food, removing any garbage, any cover that may be around your house that provide them a safe space. Could be very beneficial. If the raccoons are getting into your house, again, you're going to have to seal that up, a little carpentry to get up there and secure that access spot where they're trying to get in. Again, make sure there's no young raccoons inside before you do that. Similar to bats, bats will have an uptick in bats over the next couple of months. They'll be looking for new roost locations to have young. And so it may be your attic or your shutters or your crawl space out on your porch, something like that. If there are any access points, you need to close those up now. But raccoons in gardens, they can also, electric fence, a little 4 to 6 inch electric fence around your garden. You can maybe have multiple strands, the 4 inch and then maybe a 6 to 8 inch strand to keep raccoons out, making sure they don't have any overhanging branches or any structures they can crawl in and jump into the garden. Especially if you're growing corn, it can really cause some damage to our corn. Chipmunks can be a problem. And I don't hear a lot of damage is caused by chipmunks, but they'll definitely come in and take fruits and feed on some of the chew on some of the corn and some of the gourds and things that you may be trying to grow. But again, a small fencing or removing that cover, and so they are exposed to these aerial predators, the hawks and owls that are going to be flying by, foraging in your area, can reduce some of that damage. Any other questions? Okay. Have been live trapping squirrels and relocating from the wooded area away. Keep in mind that we can't relocate wildlife. So if we trap wildlife on our property, we have to release it on our property or euthanize it. You can't take it down to the local state park or local, to your neighbor that you don't really like, or any of the wildlife management areas and release it. There's some issues with disease spread. There's issues with, that animal being thrown into a new home range and the defense of other animals and exposed to other animals. And so you can't relocate it. Now, if you want to, if you have several hundred acres and you can relocate it to the other side of your property, that's okay. But keep in mind, if you start to trap, whether it be a groundhog, a woodchuck, squirrels, if you trap it, you have to release it on your property or you have to euthanize it. And so, be aware that, once you start trapping, those are your two options, and be prepared to deal with it in both of those ways. They can definitely, squirrels will dig up. Yeah. If you're planting corn, they're going to dig up those seeds, just like digging up an acorn. They can smell it and they can look for it. But definitely if you're removing squirrels, you can't relocate them. Vicks Vapor Rub on cotton balls. I'm assuming that was in an attic, either mothballs, naphthalene, and then Vicks Vapor Rub on cotton balls. If it's just a putrid odor in that attic, it can work. But if there's any ventilation and it dilutes that smell, and that smell's not as strong as it normally could be, that could be an issue. So if it's a nice closed area, closed space in your attic, either Vicks Vapor Rub on cotton balls can work. It's a very strong odor, or just mothballs. That naphthalene smell can also keep them out. One new message. All right, looks like that's all the questions. If you do have other questions, hopefully everyone has the code word. They've got the QR code there. If you do have questions, please shoot me an email, sheldon.owen@mail.wvu.edu. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. You can call the office, but I'm rarely there just because I'm out running around the state on various projects and working with you all, the landowners and citizens of West Virginia. So I will get back to you. It just may take me a couple of days to do that. Email is the easiest way. So if you have any wildlife related questions, please shoot me an email and I'll respond as quickly as I can.
Thank you,
Keely, I think that's all that I have there.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate you joining us, and this was very informative. I know I deal with several of those critters on a regular basis, so it was very informative for me as well. For those of you that are watching, you can find this a recording of this video later on Facebook, just in case you want to go back and listen to more of the information, or if you want to check out some of those products that were recommended. And then if you're watching this back later for the first time, the link to take the survey will be in the description of the video. So thank you guys again, and everyone have a wonderful day.
Thank you all.